I'm Dean Newland, and welcome to the Business of Intuition, where I coach, facilitate, train, and speak on the hard science and meaningful experience of intuitive leadership in business, so you can make better decisions, forge real connections, and creatively solve problems to amplify your impact and simplify your life. Welcome to the Business of Intuition. Can grit and intuition coexist as driving forces for success in the workplace? And are we in the midst of a profound societal crisis? And do leaders hold the key to guiding us towards a new phase? Well, my next guest on the Business of Intuition thinks yes to both of those questions. Our conversation today delved into the pressing issue of the disconnection between the modern workplace and society at large. My guest spotlighted the vital need to infuse intuition, heart, and soul into professional endeavors and leadership roles. Her personal journey served as an inspiring example of overcoming societal expectations to align with one's true purpose. And amid the challenges posed by the pandemic, our discussion underscored the importance of resilience and inner knowing. Furthermore, we explored the delicate balance between technology and spirituality, emphasizing the role of moral technology in fostering personal and spiritual development. Tirzah Shirai started a business out of pure necessity, and she hit a lull in paychecks as an award-winning film director and had less than $1,000 to her name. Though she started Blinkbar out of need, she quickly grew the company from $0 to $30 million in 5 years as she applied her skill for storytelling with her ability to paint a big picture and develop a strategy to get there. Tirzah is a member of YPO and has been featured in Forbes, Good Morning America, and NYT. Tirzah experienced growing from almost nothing and a childhood of poverty to a quick rise of amazing success in both the business and film world. This put her in rooms with the quote unquote high achievers who were hustling their way to a dream. And it was through that proximity that she realized most successful people are not living the good life everyone thinks they are. Tirzah Shirai on the Business of Intuition. Tirzah, it's great to have you on the show. Wonderful to meet you. And I think that your story is compelling and you have a lot to share. Let me just start off with what's the big, absolute important message that you want to tell people? And then we'll start building around that. I want to know about your background, your history, the businesses. But what's the big message? I mean, you go to bed at night and you got to go, I want to make sure people know this. What is that thing?
Wow, you're setting such a high bar.
I know. I'm sorry.
We'll just jump right in, shall we?
Let's just jump right in. Let's get to the real core.
So, I would say there's a lot of conversations around things like intuition and bringing the feminine or the female to the boardroom and into the workplace. And I would say I want to take that even a step further and talk about the role for both men and women when it comes to not only intuition, because I think that's so important, but the heart and the soul. And what does that mean for us as human beings when we start to bring our purpose and our soul and our heart into and weave them into our work that we do on a daily basis, into our business?
And that's great. I love it. Why is that important now? I mean, is there something that you feel is shifting? You mentioned in our interview, before the interview, that there's an elephant in the room with respect to businesses these days that we're just not talking about. What aren't we talking about?
I mean, things have changed. No one's the same that they were 3 years ago. And to walk through life and pretend otherwise, that is the elephant in the room. And of course, when we change as individuals and when these huge shifts happen in our society and in our culture and in our group soul, I would say in our soul, then we feel all of a sudden, I mean, I have friends who have, $300 million companies that are kind of going, wait, I don't feel like I'm in alignment, or everything has changed. My supply chain is changed. What I want to do on a daily basis is changed, right? There have been these massive shifts that have taken place. And, I think really then we have to look at, there's what we should do, and then there's what we're called to do and what our heart is longing for. And so I think so much of, my own personal journey of the past 3 years has been this huge allowing myself to follow my heart, as scary and crazy as it sounds, and allow the letting go of the shoulds, all the shoulds, that I should be doing this and I should be doing that. And I know from all the conversations I've had that I am so not alone in that. And there are many, many millions of people feeling very disconnected. And either they, are feeling a need to pivot in a way that seems a little intimidating or scary, or they're feeling like they completely need to, like I did, clear the deck and completely start over.
So tell us your story. What's the context behind all this knowledge that you have? What did you learn along the way? I mean, you mentioned obviously the pandemic the last 3 years, but I mean, there's obviously some stuff that's happened with you in your life and what you've learned that predates the pandemic. What's the overall, 2-minute story on you and how you got to where you are?
So I call it BC, before COVID. So BC.
Okay, I like that.
BC, I was, I was from a small town in Canada. I am from a small town in Canada. And, I was born into really a family that had, no wealth. We were really in poverty a lot. We got clothing out of, garbage bags and food from the food bank throughout my life. And that really left a deep impression on me. And I worked so hard my whole life to become part of, these organizations like YPO, and really feel like I had arrived in my life. And I worked my way up from a girl from the prairies of Alberta to someone who, was in YPO Beverly Hills, and I was flying around on private planes, and I felt like, I arrived, and I was part of that, so-called 1%. And I think when 2020 hit, and it hit me harder than most people I know, which we can get into later, just we were going to close around and, everything, the whole world in California, like we were closed for a year. And I remember sitting in a forum and this light bulb went off. And I said, wow, my whole life I've worked to basically climb this mountain, right? This mountain of all the things that I just mentioned. And here I am at the top, and I feel like I climbed the wrong mountain. I feel like I thought by earning money and prestige and, belonging to these private clubs, that I somehow would earn love. Like I was conflating money and love together. And I remember just this wave of silence over the room where we all kind of had this recognition. And for me, that was, in March of 2020, maybe April. And it really started unfolding for me into realigning with my purpose, what really matters to me. And, I also became a mom in 2019. So there's that as well.
Yeah.
And yeah.
And just to clarify, you had a pretty successful business that I think you said you recently sold. Could you tell us quickly about that? Just make people have reference to that.
Yeah, of course. So so basically I became what I call an accidental entrepreneur. So in 5 years, I built a $30 million company. I lived very simply. I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment, and I really put everything, I sacrificed a lot to build this company. And we went to market in Q4 of 2019. For those that have raised capital before, we were A round, which was really our first. We hadn't taken any investors up until that point. And we had gone through all the diligence. We had done everything, and we were set to close in March of 2020. And we had to shutter our company for 1 year. So obviously, it was one team taking the whole round down. And so they weren't able to invest. And through that year, I went through a tremendous amount of change, as you could imagine, having a company where I was on a treadmill and then just having everything really taken away and completely shut down. And unlike restaurants, there was nothing we could do. We couldn't do takeout. We couldn't do, lashes on the sidewalk. And so for me, when we reopened over a year later, when we were allowed to reopen, everything had changed. I had changed, most importantly. My desire to do business in California had also changed. And when we reopened, we were really back at 2015 when we first opened our first location as far as revenue and, what we had lost along the way. Mm-hmm. So we took a profound hit. And of course, I'm a driven type A. I could have got in there and, built it all back up again. But it has been, a 3-year process of letting that go and realizing. So yeah, we basically, as of the end of, by the time this airs, we will have completely closed and I will have transitioned out of that role.
And that's Blinkbar for those who are listening in. Yeah, right. There may be some customers out there that understand what you're talking about. So I'm fascinated by this because you said some things I want to go back to. You worked like a dog. You sacrificed a lot. You had what you would call, I guess, some of the trappings of success, flying around in private jets, the 1%, and you had this epiphany that maybe you weren't living your purpose, which is so wonderful that you were able to get that. Most people seek for that, but when you have it, you've got to pay attention to it. So that's great. I guess my question is, for you and for others, can one have both? Meaning, can one be living their purpose and still be flying around on jets and planes and, all of those things? Those are not necessarily mutually exclusive. And I'm assuming that's what you're saying, but that just wasn't what you wanted.
Yes, absolutely you can. And right. I know many people who are, right? I also know many people who are not. And so I think that's something that only, again, going back to intuition and the heart, and maybe even if we go woo enough into the soul.
We'll go woo as long as you want to go.
Then, we say, hey, only you can truly know. But I know that I had conflated money with happiness, achievement with happiness. And that when I got there, I looked around and thought that people, including myself, would be a lot happier than I was. But of course, that doesn't mean that any of those things are bad or wrong. They're lovely. They're absolutely lovely. And it's a fun game to play. I had a lot of fun playing it.
I saw some TED Talk not long ago where somebody was espousing what the 3 or 4 or most important success factor is in today for a leader. And what they came up with was this word grit. Grit was what was more important than contacts and intelligence and education, your pedigree and all of that. And I'm thinking, okay, that sort of makes sense in some ways, but it also, for me, made me wonder whether that was the old paradigm still being referenced as our vehicle for quote unquote, however we want to term it, success. So I guess what I'm wondering is, can one be gritty? Meaning, what does that mean? A persistence, working hard is the wrong word. Being driven by a passion that takes effort again, but at the same time, you have your heart guiding you, your intuition providing you the course corrections along the way. Can we have both of those things come together?
Absolutely. We can do whatever we want to. I think, I love the word grit because I feel like, as someone who has bootstrapped and done that, I also love the word and the internal impression of the word resilience. I have a young child, and that's something I hope for him is resilience. And I think for me, where it kind of bifurcates is that grit kind of is just like going through the motions to me, I would say, like just plowing through. And resiliency is allowing the expansion, allowing the room for I think there's more allowing for me in resiliency, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I do think you're right that we're not talking about this enough. You've seen it, I've seen it, where people are working their butt off, but they're wondering silently, is that all there is? Is there some sort of reason for this other than the fact that I'm now almost addicted into the cycle of work, this cycle of effort without purpose? And maybe there's some sort of background fear around money and having enough. And this is the way I think I'm going to be able to do that. But why else don't people follow their soul, their intuition in your perspective? What is it? I mean, it's there, but why do we ignore it?
Oh, I mean, that's such a rich question. How long do we have?
I don't know.
So I would say, why do we ignore it? I think we could start with the school system and how, we're
Ooh,
taught to disconnect from these
yeah.
very primal, we have to raise our hand to ask if we can use the bathroom at a young age. And there's these, there's the way that our society is labeled. And then I could get into, as a female CEO, there's a lot of conversations, which I and others appreciate about, the seat at the table and including women and ESG and all of that lovely stuff. But I would say, which, because I like to be a little provocative sometimes, is it's more than a seat. It's an essence. It's not just women showing up as men. There is a feminine quality, which of course a man can also exhibit and does exhibit as well. But there's an allowing of intuition and things like heart and emotion and having a bad day and having a family and having children that also needs to be allowed into not just the boardroom and the conversation, but into the reality of being a leader, of running a company, and into the world at large.
Absolutely. I want to get your reaction to something. I just picked up a book recently called The Fourth Turning, and some pretty good research that basically says that history does in fact repeat itself in 80-year increments broken down into 20 subsets, and that the first set of the 80 years is called the high. And in our country, that happened at the end of World War I. And then that 20-year high where not everybody, we still had segregation, we still had a lot of issues in the world and in their country, but there was a pervasive sort of coming together, conformity, and things were, from some perspective, pretty good. And then it ended right about when Kennedy was assassinated. And then we got into the next phase, which was around the awakening. And so that was rock and roll and drugs and the the civil rights movement and so forth. And I think that ended somewhere right around Reagan's second inaugural as president. And then the third one started with, no, I guess it finished right around 2008 when our big financial crisis happened. And that's the unraveling. And then the last one is the crisis. And according to this book, we're in the crisis right now. And that's COVID, that's George Floyd, that's the economy, that's the political divisiveness, that's this elephant in the room that you're talking about. And to some people hear that information and they get scared. But on the other hand, I feel like these leaders, these people, us, you and I, all of us, are the ones who will bring us to the next phase if we believe in this. There are shoots of insight that will lead us to this new phase of the high. And I guess I'm curious as to your view on what you're talking about from the soul perspective, the individual perspective, and expand it to a larger group, meaning society as a whole. Do you sense what I've just described in this book? Does that seem to resonate with you? And what's your take on all this in terms of the macro version of people needing to rediscover their intuition and their souls?
Yeah. Well, without maybe going too far down the mystical rabbit hole, shall we say?
It's really okay if you do. I mean, that's
really
all right.
Okay. Okay. So I would say, there are many cultures that would recognize huge swaths of time and epochs, and they would absolutely recognize that we are coming out of what is called a Kali Yuga, a very dark age. And everything you just said, I think, is very accurate. I think that it is in my, I'm a student of what I would, the mysteries, the ancient mystery schools. And there's a lot of knowledge and, that we just don't receive in school. And so I would say that timeline's a little in my opinion, in the studying I've done, it's a little truncated or a little shortened, but it is very accurate as far as we are in a crisis, absolutely. And you can see it everywhere you turn. And so much of that, and this is where I'm going to go a little bit down the rabbit hole, is absolutely destined, right? We are the densest as far as material and densest that we are ever going to be as humanity. And we are now rising and we're remembering who we are. There's a massive remembering that we see in our organizations. As leaders, we're remembering. We're starting to feel uncomfortable. We're starting to look around and question. And then all of our employees and our organizations are also starting to remember. And so as we rise, it's kind of like the sun just starts to come up and it starts to color the sky. And that's where we're at. And it's a beautiful place because, as you said, there are so many opportunities as leaders, as people really step into and start acknowledging that we have a soul. We're human beings. We are souls having a human experience, right? And as we begin in our own unique ways to engage with that truth in a real way, because for me, up until 2020, I've always been a very spiritual person. I've also been a very type A, hustle hard, work hard, like YPO type A type person. But those worlds were very separate. And I think until 2020 happened, they collided in a way that I realized, oh, I'm never going to be able to untangle this mess again. They're together. And I think I know I am so not alone in that. And the more we can enter into these conversations, which I so welcome, and talk about, wait, are you feeling this? Wait, what's happening in your organization? What's happening inside you? And so I think that, yes, the dark age, but also what light, what an opportunity to be living when we're living as the light is coming on and as we're getting this incredible remembering sweeping across the globe.
And as that happens, you mentioned feeling uncomfortable, which makes me think, well, then we must be resisting this in some ways. Otherwise, it wouldn't be uncomfortable. If we didn't resist, we would just go with the flow. We would allow for this change to happen. How can we, in your perspective, allow this inner knowing that's beginning to bubble up in people, this light that you're describing? The natural response is probably to feel uncomfortable, but how do we move through that? Do we acknowledge that we feel this way and we call attention to it ourselves and then create another story about it? What's your sense?
Yes. It's conversations like this, I believe, that are the beginning of the unfolding of that. And it's it's acknowledging and saying, hey, this is real. This is happening, and opening and allowing, right? So again, I'm going to bring it back to the heart because I think it is so important. I see this real movement to biohack everything. And I know, that's a huge movement and I love it. And I know a lot of people in the movement, but I don't want to biohack our hearts. I feel like it's very important that we acknowledge the spiritual gift that is the heart. And the more we tune into this, here's the way I like to think about it. And you could just think of this as a fable or whatever, however you want to go with it. But before we incarnate here on earth, perhaps we have a conversation. Perhaps we're in a school on the other side. And we come down and we write out all the things, the people that we want to marry and meet, and the business partners that screw us over, the bad deals we had, all these lessons that we learn. And we kind of we're given, maybe by our guardian angel or something, this kind of seed, and it's planted in our heart. And as we come here, it's kind of this compass or navigation tool that never leads us astray. And it only becomes uncomfortable when we try to squash it down, when we try to ignore it, when we try to push it aside.
That's a great point. So one of the bigger news items of the day has been the growth and the adoption of AI. I just saw something yesterday that the latest technology, these supercomputers they're creating, need to be need to run at almost like absolute zero, like 400 degrees below Fahrenheit in order to operate. So we're talking about they're called quantum computers, right? So all this stuff is fascinating. And, we could basically maybe solve some huge problems in healthcare, et cetera, that we could never touch before. How do we coexist our hearts in a chat GPT AI environment?
This is maybe my favorite question.
All right, good. We finally got to it 20 minutes in.
So good. It's all been so good. But I think, our human destiny is to create moral technology. And that sounds so weird. What is, it's almost like a spiritual business. It sounds like an oxymoron on the surface. Right. Like what? How could that be? Moral technology. And I think the line, first of all, I think we're not creating a lot of moral technology.
Right.
And I can expand on that. But I feel like the line for me personally that I have learned is that when I am in a place, when I'm using technology, as opposed to it using me, then I'm in the right relationship with technology. And to be very aware when technology is having the upper hand and it is using me. And so I think things like Chat GPT and many of these things are great. I could do a sidebar on Neuralink if you like.
Well, that's the Elon Musk's business. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, look, how great. You can download Google into your brain, right?
Right.
And I have a 4-year-old right now, and I think of all the things that he's going to have to navigate throughout his life, hopefully long life. And, things like this, right? I can't imagine. You can have Neuralink, you can download Google at any moment in your brain, right? And again, it goes back to our pre-conversation. If we don't start to acknowledge that we are souls, we are having a human experience, and what is actually available to us as humans, our real, who cares about having Google in your brain when you have all of these other talents and abilities, our light body that can do things, they can see into like the Akashic records and other, times and places. And I know that is going to sound wild to the audience, but what humans are actually capable of is so much bigger and greater. And now it takes more work than just going in for a surgery to have something. So I don't want to sound like I'm anti-technology or even anti-private jets, because I'm absolutely not. We're here to play and have fun as well. But I think until we start to get the correct cosmology as humanity, there is a spiritual science that is available to us today. And it wasn't available a few hundred years ago to the average person.
So would technology aid us in our spiritual development? Or is it something that we almost like have to segment ourselves into, this is my spiritual life, this is my human dense life, and in that I need to continue to move forward, put food on the table, et cetera, and technology will help me with that, just like a car could, just like, a microphone could. But I don't use it. I don't see it as an extension of my spiritual development. Or do you see them as being a way that they can be, not to use the word flippantly, but a convergence, that we could find the connection between our spiritual heart, soul, and that technology is actually helping us through that journey. It's part of the Sherpa that gets us up the hill.
Yes. Yeah. I would say having technology will allow many humans to be alleviated of drudgery of jobs, like a 9-to-5 that they would have never wanted to work. Or so it can allow us the freedom to explore these things. I think for me, it always goes back to that. And only you can answer, and only I can answer for myself. Am I using technology or is it using me? And so I think, I have a course that, we're just releasing, and there's a lot of people out there. Oh, you can have Chat GPT write a course. Right. Now, it took me 3 years of my life's work to put in to just getting this course out there. This is what I would say. If you look at the most amazing creations when it comes to technology, what I like to ask myself, and what I think really the bigger question humanity should be asking itself is this true? Is this beautiful? Right? How many of these technologies can we look at and compare them to, you know, the Pieta or, you know, the Sistine Chapel? How many of these can we look at and be brought to tears by the sheer beauty of this creation?
Right. And while there's thousands and millions of people who don't hold a seat of power when it comes to policy changes and the kinds of things that affect a lot of people, what I'm gathering from what you're saying is that that wellspring that is pervasive around all people slowly starts to raise all boats. Yeah. I have another question that I wanted to ask you, that this has always been something that I've been thinking about. You know, this term about we are souls having a human experience. I've heard that for years. Many people have as well. So I can go woo woo with you on this one, and let's do it. So why is the soul? Why are we separated from the soul? Why do we need to? If the all that is, however you would describe that, which is maybe the summation of all souls, why do we break off from that? Or why are we having these human experiences that can, when you think about the soul's energetic vibration is so much higher and expansive. To be in a physical body is a really low vibration. And one could say it's God having an experience of itself. Okay, but I keep wondering, like, all right, this is the philosophical part of my brain. I'm going like, all right, so, but why? Why is this important? Why not just stay at the soul level? Why do we have to muck it up by being in these bodies?
Yeah. I mean, it takes, I think, orientating ourselves to a correct cosmology, which again, I've always loved to study these perennial truths, which are these, you know, threads that run through all great traditions and religions. And one of them is this experience of humanity being in different stages. So in an earlier epoch, we might have been like an infant, right? But the whole purpose of this, you know, according to many teachings, is we were all part of one amorphous, you know, spiritual hierarchy. And then we fall to individuate, to become Dean, a Tirzah, an individual. And within, so conscious and alive within the greater. So we are all one in one way. That's absolutely true. But the fun begins when we individuate and fully develop our higher I within the ego. And we develop to the highest ability of our soul within that greater piece. So I would equate it to like if you have children, like a child is born in the world and they go through different phases, obviously, right? At one moment, we were, you know, as humanity breastfed by these hierarchies because that's what was required, right? There wasn't a lot that we could do on our own. But we are now teenagers. We are now, you know, railing against this. We have so much confidence and we're, you know, drinking a little like we're doing all these things where humanity as a whole, we're kind of in that early, you know, 12 to 13 phase. That's just, you know, we got a lot of confidence and not a lot of knowledge. And and so we are at the point where we are now rising, and without getting into territory of religion and my personal belief, I have to kind of.
I understand, but and you're right. And I think there's some universal truths, lowercase t, on this that we feel. I think we're saying that cuts across religions and spiritual practices, and there's something that keeps showing up over and over and over again when you start studying the spiritual text. There's a similar message, there's a similar theme that keeps coming back over and over and over again. And it sounds like, and I kind of think about Abraham Hicks' work, you know, about a law of attraction and our ability to coexist with the physical form and the contrast that it brings into our life, as well as the spiritual form that allows us to coexist with that and to create something out of that. And in my mind, that we're human beings that love to create things, you know, and sometimes the creation requires contrast, which might be considered, if you resist it, unpleasant, but if you allow it, you get into flow.
Yeah, I love what the image that's coming to me now. Have you ever seen those Ukrainian, like my grandma had them, like those nested dolls?
Yes, yeah.
That's what
Different
I
levels.
think. Yes, that's essentially what we are, right? We have this experience of being this individual, one phase of that, but really all of creation, right? We have all of these microbiome, if you want to get into, that microbiome, and then they're part of this and we're part of something else. And so there's this, you're still this individuality, but we're kind of these nested dolls within hierarchy and then within us.
That's a great journey. So tell us more about this new business, this training program that you said took 3 years to develop, and the process that you take people through.
Yeah. So I like to say I'm an accidental entrepreneur, and this is no accident. I mean, it was really something that kept coming to me in my dreams and in my sleep. And I kept pushing it away, thinking, man, this is really out there. I mean, this is, and as it started to take more and more form, it's really become my life's work. And so it's an online course. And so it's called the Venusian School of Business, Venus being widely known as the feminine planet and Mars being known as the masculine. And so it is a 3-phase course, and you can take all 3 of them or whichever one you feel called to. So the 3 phases, the first phase is all about really, like we talked about, acknowledging the role that our heart and our purpose play in our life, in our energy levels, and aligning with it. So whether it's pivoting your existing business or a complete, rewrite of everything. So that's really the foundation, right? If we're going to build a house, that course is the foundation. There's a lot of excavation and spiritual work. The second phase is all about healing our inherited and the relationship with money that we were born into. Not just if we come like I did from poverty, but also, I've dealt with a lot of people that I work with who were born into what we call wealth poverty, which is the polar opposite, right? But really has the same starvation of love and connection. So that is about also redefining our relationship with the material world. What does success really mean to us? And then phase 3 is all about nuts and bolts business, but from place of alignment, integrity, and really being heart-centered when it comes to branding, communication, marketing, and putting ourselves out there. And, a big premise of that is, how do we use technology morally instead of having it use us? And so, those are the 3 phases. You can go to the VenusianSchoolOfBusiness.com and find out more about it.
And again, it sounds like what you're suggesting is that the more business focused phase, the 3rd phase, will be a lot more successful if participants find purpose and heal their relationship with money, which makes a lot of intuitive sense. I was thinking about what you talked about with wealth poverty. There's a great book by a guy named Jacob Needleman. And essentially, he said that materialism is a disease of the mind starved for new ideas. And I thought that was just such a great phrase. Think about our retail therapy that sometimes we all get ourselves into. And underneath all that might just be a hunger for connection, a hunger for expansion. And that new thing that you want to buy is really the way to get it in the wrong way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's great. Well, last but not least, any final thoughts that you'd like to share with people regarding heading into, I know that this will probably go live, I think, in the next couple of weeks, but we're still going to be pretty into the holidays. Holidays can be a place for triggers for people. We're going back to family. Certainly wealth is going to be a trigger for some when it comes to what we can and can't afford with respect to gifts we want to give, travel, all that stuff. Is there any sort of tips you might be able to implant in our heads as we head into a very interesting time of the year?
Yeah, I think what I would say is, being present and really observing what comes up and just allowing it to be. So, I'm part of these different Facebook groups and stuff, and I've seen the financial Like, I've seen the financial struggles that people and families are going through. And I think using that as an opportunity to really drop into what the holidays are about and to make it about connection, to make it about, taking that a step further. I think that's one big thing. And I think the Advent season is, for me, very special. I have spent a lot of my 18 years in LA, and the consumerism there, all the parties that we're drawn to, people we see maybe once a year. Mm-hmm. Our whole society is focused on us focusing externally. So it's about the party, the outfit, the gifts. And I would just say, if you feel inclined to, really shifting that focus whenever possible to inside. What's going on inside for me? What is that internal experience? And, just that little shift of being conscious of how much we are compelled through billboards and commercials, and when we're scrolling on Instagram, to buy, and consume, start to feel what is coming up for you inside. That's certainly how I have made a lot of headway in that area.
Great idea. I'm thinking about somebody that once said that conscious mind takes up about 10 to maybe 5%, and the unconscious mind is the other 80 or 90%. And I think that, as I hear you, that the soul is probably on that unconscious side. And we have to call it out. We have to listen to it. It comes out in subtle little knowings and wisdoms and feelings that can easily get lost if we don't pay attention to it. It's a great message. I really appreciate that. How can people connect to you? Either LinkedIn, your website, just rattle off some of those addresses.
Yeah, the website. So the Venusian School of Business, hopefully we'll be able to link it somewhere, because I know that can be difficult to spell. Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn as well, Tirzah Shirai.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been a real delight to get to know you.
Thank you. Likewise. I love your work, and I think what you're doing is so important, and I feel honored to be a guest today. So thank you so much.
Honor's all mine.
Thank you for listening to The Business of Intuition. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to learn more about Dean or Mission Facilitators Leadership, go to mfileadership.com. That's mfileadership.com.